and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour with Jo Yardley. My name is Draxter Dupre. Every week I introduce the show by saying that Jo Yardley is absent because her computer is dead and her microphone is dead, and she's also very busy in building fabulous things. She's also in the Sansar preview program, I hear. But today I have a fabulous guest who I will introduce in just a minute. We're also streaming this live, but on the podcast you may not see her, so I want to just briefly do the regular spiel. Drax Files Radio Hour is a community podcast. We depend on your support and all that. Please chip in, become a sponsor, become a voluntary subscriber, and all that. Last week we had a troll on Lavender Storydale. There's a really big discussion going on the blog. I appreciate everybody that comments on the blog about the troll experience. A lot of people IM'd me. They said they couldn't get through the first 10 minutes of this show because they found it so grueling and they got their blood boiling. I encourage you to listen to this entire show because at least for me, as I pointed out, the type of trolling that Lavender does is, of course, to a lesser degree harmful. I mean, if you compare it to extremely offensive trolling that's out there, or harassment to the extent where people are getting calls and saying, I'm going to come over and kill you. There's, of course, a sort of a difference, but we get into the meat of the matter in the last 15 minutes of that show. So my point is that what she does, harassing people who find a safe space in this wonderful world, and she is kind of hiding behind saying, oh, this is just a joke, that doesn't cut it for me. That's a really lame excuse. But anyway, the discussion is very good on the blog. Now, today we're discussing another wonderful topic. Last week it was trolling. And today it's sexual harassment at the workplace and gender discrimination. And my guest today is Patty Rankle, who in Second Life is Bella Luna X and Martin Patrick. So she has two personalities, don't we all? At least have two. I put the word out to a lot of people to put a panel together on sexual discrimination and what the context is. I'll explain in just a second. A lot of people declined to be on the show, and I completely understand it. It's a hot topic, and we are discussing this, of course, because of a case that you may or may not know about, and I'll explain that in a second. First, Patty Rankle is a graduate of Singularity University at NASA. As her female avatar, she has been a guest speaker in the Open Simulator Community Conference, ESSA Community Conference, Metaverse Cultural Series, and she presented her work on holographic mixed reality for avatars at NASA, aims to one Philip Rosedale. As her male avatar, she explored gender roles in business development and production management of SL projects, which I find super fascinating, and we're going to have a separate show about that too, because there's a lot of talk about, do you have to be male in order to be successful in SL business and such. But today, well, first of all, Patty, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
It's an honor that you are here with me, and we're at an undisclosed location on the mainland, by the way. I have a little undisclosed office here, if you're watching this on the YouTube stream, and I'm not going to say where we are because we had some issues with trolls. Now, Patty, what we're discussing here, in short, is a sexual harassment and gender discrimination lawsuit that is filed by the former social media manager or head of social media at a company called Upload VR. I don't know if Second Lives are familiar with that. Just in short, Upload VR is sort of it's a kind of a media upstart that is sort of started as a website with videos that interviewed people in the VR industry, and now it's basically, the go-to website, or they're attempting to anyways, just like TechCrunch and others, but specifically for VR. They also have a co-working space in San Francisco where High Fidelity is doing a lot of stuff. You can rent some of the spaces. Robert Scoble, aka the Scobleizer, was was sort of artist in resident here, and the former social media manager sued the co-founders for sexual harassment and gender discrimination. And so people basically, actually, I'm going to bring you in, Patty, just a second. I just wanted to lay out what they're being accused of doing. So here's a bunch of juicy quotes. One of the co-founders, Taylor Freeman, said that it was hard to concentrate and be productive, and all they could think about was having sex with them. They're talking in the presence of the female colleagues. And then this other guy said that he had a boner and had to go to the restroom and rub one out in order to continue working. Also, what is alleged in this lawsuit is that they had a kink room where they encouraged employees to have sex during work hours. And lastly, what I find really interesting, I'm reading this off the Ars Technica blog. Robert Scoble, who was the entrepreneur in residence at Upload VR, said on a Facebook post, he said that the two co-founders, Will Mason and Taylor Freeman, were great guys. And Hillary Mason, who is the CEO of another startup, replied to this Robert Scoble post, "Men are often great guys to other men. Then they're total dicks to some women. When those women speak up, it's painful. And you need to take a moment to think about what that person is going through and give her the benefit of the doubt." And Robert Scoble replied, "Good point." So that's what I wanted to really talk about, because I'm a man and I watch this stuff with horror. There's a ton of stuff going on various Facebook groups. It's really awful. And I joked when I put this show together by saying, let's talk about gender discrimination and sexual harassment in the military at Fox News, or at some sort of sports club that are sort of boys clubs. But it seems like Silicon Valley is just another one of those boys clubs. Anyway, I talk too much, Patty. I'm sorry. Patty, when you heard the news, what was your first reaction?
I was appalled, and mostly because I have spent a career living that reality. Since the first time I worked at the Olympic Games in 1996 until recently, this has been something that has happened in almost every job and place that I have worked at, and unfortunately has been tolerated. For women, they have stayed quiet for fear of retaliation, for fear of losing their jobs. And if you look at the history of women's rights, we just gained our rights not that long ago.
Yeah.
And so it is obvious that as we move forward in education and in entering the workforce, to, even though the law says we are equal, that there is a true imbalance, because the people on top that control these companies are men. Yeah. And so the opportunity for women, at least in my experience, have always been about how good do you look or how hot you are. I mean, I've experienced, even really famous designers that would come up to me in the workplace and say hello and kiss me in the neck, and everybody would laugh.
That's insane.
And I've been, many times in my career, the only woman in the room. And moving forward, I have decided to speak up and out, because I am also a survivor of sexual abuse. And I have spent many years healing and talking to therapists and retreats, and then becoming an activist, speaking to the police force, speaking to different organizations as to how to approach victims. I can tell you that one of the general things that happen with victims after any type of sexual harassment or sexual abuse is that the people in their immediate surroundings automatically questions them, automatically denies that anything happens. And there's an official term in psychology that's called gaslighting. And
gaslighting, sorry? Yes, gaslighting.
Gaslighting, Correct. And that is when the victim is told, no, that didn't happen. No, sorry, you must be exaggerating. You must have imagined it. To the point where if everybody around that person tells that woman that that is not real, then they begin to question it themselves. And it's very sad when it happens in the workplace, when a woman is trying to basically just build up her dream. You go to school, nobody tells you the reality of the business world is going to be different, because you're going to have to be faced with gender discrimination, people treating you like a sexual object. And so I'm proud of the women who are speaking up right now in the forums. I'm definitely recommend that the lawsuit continue. And I can tell you from experience that a victim or a survivor would not move forth into legal action without evidence. And we live in a time and age of technological evolution and disruption, where technology is getting smaller, portable, wearable, and knowing that, it would be very stupid for anybody in a professional atmosphere to condone these type of activities, because it could be recorded, it could be put out into the world. And it does require a certain level of professionalism and ethics that must be upheld. And so as moving forward, I do hope that this lawsuit is taken seriously. Because it's not fun to be part of an all boys club, and it is very real, and it is something that still happens today. And unless women speak up and out, that will never change, and it will continue to be accepted, and people will continue to brush it aside and say, well, they didn't speak up, so it must be okay.
Right, and the lawsuits are necessary really to change things. Otherwise, without the pressure, it just continues. You know, my immediate reaction was I was really shocked, but then my second thought was, oh wow, that's not surprising, because these founders, they're kind of young and come from that gamer background, broadly speaking, and there's been a lot of stuff with Gamergate and with just some awful behavior of, let's just put the cards on the table, by extremely immature guys who are just, I don't know, maybe they never had any interaction with a woman. So I was not trying to diminish the magnitude, but I was basically, my own sort of first thought was, wow, the whole world, Silicon Valley and VR is sort of run by these kids who have absolutely never been taught properly how to act in settings with the other gender. But what you're saying, how you just described your own story, was that to you this is not a surprise, in the sense that this happened at pretty much every workplace, and not only in the tech industry.
Correct, and it has continued to happen. And what I have noticed is that at the highest level, like the top professional teams in the world, you see it less. But having spent time at Singularity University, at NASA Ames, and close to Silicon Valley, and a lot of very young people with their startups, it's almost like the ego is driving their technological innovation and experience, because you have a lot of these young people that are coming out of school or in their early 20s, and all of a sudden they come into a lot of money, and the rock star attitude and the rock star lifestyle.
It is a little bit like the music industry, I guess. Right?
Well, even in rock star video games, some of their parties are just, wild. And so, it's almost like the norm. It's the boys club, like, let's party. But at some point, there needs to be a separation between the business and professional world and what you would do in your own personal life.
Well, but then you're kind of sort of not confirming what I said. And again, we can walk and chew gum all, at the same time, and these things can be true at the same time. But what I hear from you're saying is that one of the ways you analyze this is that there is a connection between young people who come into a position of power. They they may not have had this, like I said, the they're not fully formed in sort of societal civilized behavior. And oh god, I hate that term, civilized behavior, because civilization is a very thin veneer, but that connection between sort of that power that is given to them by the money, by the startup money, and the hubris, maybe, that they're sort of capable of everything because they're very fluid in the tech sector, kind of pushes that, right?
Correct, and immaturity is a factor in this. I mean, at the same time, it is not an excuse. These men
almost certainly not. Absolutely.
Exactly, and I mean, these men have.
I'm just trying to. I want to make clear that I'm not.
Girlfriend.
Let me just say real quick, I want to make very clear that I'm not trying to use this as an excuse like some do, because this is good that you bring this up. I've heard this somewhere said, these are just boys, they'll grow up. I mean, you hear this also in the connection with Donald Trump. I just heard that on a show yesterday, which I think is completely insane. Somebody actually made the point, well, Donald Trump is kind of like a man-child, so he's not responsible for his actions. That's completely a bizarre argument. I'm just trying to kind of narrow it down what it is, if this phenomenon is just, depressingly all over corporate culture, or if there is some sort of special thing that has to do with the tech sector, is kind of, I guess, what I'm trying to find out.
I think it's across all sectors. And in general, I mean, like I said, women just gained their rights not that long ago. And before then, they were seen as objects. They were property of their husbands. And we're talking generations and generations of women being treated like this. And so what is acceptable really is just, it begins with your family, with your community, your immediate surrounding. And I think that maturity and wisdom comes in the path of the peaceful warrior, for men to be able to be warriors, but instead of letting the negative energy of that drive them into ego, but to be able to balance it with like a warrior healer, being vulnerable, being respectful, having ethics, being a gentleman. It's a lot nicer to deal with men who are in the path of the peaceful warrior, and who have respect and who act professional in a professional business setting. Unfortunately, maybe within their family and the way that they grew up, they weren't taught the social skills or the respect for women. But like I said, we live in different times and in an age where technology could end up backfiring on them if they get recorded, and that becomes evidence. For a young company, that's fairly damaging. I don't know how they're going to overcome this.
No.
Exactly. I don't know how they're going to recover from this if there's evidence proving the statements made in the lawsuit.
So you're suggesting, I have tons of different questions all swirling around in my mind. Can you put us, and by us I mean men, and actually I had a conversation with a Second Life friend of mine who said, well, Jo and Drax, you're really offensive and you're kind of sexist because sometimes the woman, women can be very awful too, and there's sort of gold diggers and stuff. He was all over the place in an exchange with me. His point was that we were assuming that it's always the men are the bad guys, and I was sort of in that same vein, and he said, well, that's not true. That is actually sort of reverse sexism. And I found that argument so ridiculous. Can you step us through? You hinted at it a little bit earlier. Somebody comes in and sort of kissed you on the neck, and others were laughing. Can you paint a picture, tell a story how that sort of everyday sexism, harassment, sexual harassment happens?
Sure. I mean, in that particular example, I was doing an event that was on the $1 billion scale, and the man that came up to me was the head sound designer, and in front of his entire team, he said hello, forward, kissed me on the neck, and then looked up to all his boys, and they all laughed. And I was one of two females that were there. I felt so uncomfortable that I left, and I went back to the production office where I cried. And the production supervisor came up to me and he asked me what was wrong, and I told him what happened, and he immediately offered to have me transferred to his team. Now that happened within a day, and unfortunately for the other female that stayed in that other team with the sound designer, I did touch base with her a couple weeks later, and she told me that she had been invited to private parties at the team's place, that she had been cornered, groped, that comments about, how hot she was and things that they wanted to do to her were just commonplace. And she got to the point where she didn't even want to work there. And so imagine having to live under that pressure, and her saying, well, I feel so uncomfortable. I hate going to work, but yet this is paying the bills. And this is, such an honor, such a high profile type of event that, it would look good on my resume. And so she's trying to figure out, should I leave or should I stay? And I said, well, I asked to transfer out, so there are always options to moving out. Now, in regards to what you said, that, I always hear these arguments from men about, oh, well, women, and they do the same thing too. And yes, there are women out there that, do things that are not so nice, or, that might be gold diggers.
Yeah.
But again, it is not an excuse.
I mean, we don't even have to, sorry.
And I'm not saying you said it. I'm not accusing.
Yeah. No. Right. You're absolutely right. I just wanted to chime in because as you recounted this argument that's often made, I realize how incredibly stupid that is, even stupider than I pushed back at this friend of mine, because it's the same argument where people say, well, black people are all criminals. I think that's kind of the same level of argument. It's basically taking a
stereotype. It's a stereotype. Yes. And I have worked with men that are very encouraging, and I've had mentors that, just have supported my career and have been amazing people. But what I have noticed is that it's usually older men who are really going to the workplace to get work done, to be inspired, to create something amazing. And it does take a different type of life experience to get to that point and to get out of acting like a child.
You hinted also at something important earlier. Sorry to step on you here, but the other thing is really, again, the factor that these are young men who come into a position of power very, very suddenly in most cases. And I always think, I'm a father myself, and I always think, what can I do better in conjunction with these other sort of institutions like schools and such? What do I need to give my child on his way? In this case, it's a boy, and I'm worried about not properly equipping him with behavior. I mean, we live in a culture where, there's rape culture. There is incredible stuff going on in elite schools, and then very often there's case after case after case where sort of star athletes that may fall into or that may do one quote unquote bad thing, i.e. raping someone, and then the judge, the name escapes me now, from the Stanford guy, where the judge says, well, that was just sort of one little mishap and we don't want to ruin his life. I find that incredible. I don't want to ruin anybody's life and put them in jail for the rest of their lives. I want to find better solutions. But to say that because someone is sort of a rising star in some sort of industry, and then saying, well, this guy, he raped someone, but we all make mistakes. That's insane. But that's the world we live in, it seems.
Well, that's
so we're not equipping. The point is, we're not equipping young men. And by we I mean parents, schools, other institutions, with the proper tools to, I don't know. Oh God.
Well, it really does. It really does begin with just having the conversation and acknowledging that it happens. From there, it evolves to education. But if you look at the way that things have been over many generations, the immediate reaction was denial. And then after that, it's like, let's brush it under the carpet and pretend that it didn't happen. And it's like Lady Gaga said, until it happens to you, it won't be real. That's right. Very true. And I can tell you that as a survivor, it's very different to live in the shoes of a survivor and live with that trauma, because that trauma can last a lifetime, and it involves guilt and self-hatred and, a feeling of injustice. And, it's not right that you can damage somebody's life because you just want to brush it under the rug, or because somebody made a mistake. There's a difference. You can make a mistake. Oh, I ran across the street on a red light. That's a mistake.
That's a mistake.
Raping someone, mistake. That is intentional, and that is something that needs to be prosecuted under the full extent of the law. And it's not until people start speaking up and out that is going to stop. But the first step is recognizing it and saying, yes, it happens, and having the courage to speak up about it. Like you said, you approached a couple of people that said, hey, I don't know if I want to be part of that panel. Well, I can tell you that being a survivor and finding the courage to speak up was one of the most difficult things of my life, because after I healed, I just wanted to put it away and forget that part of my life existed. But what has me here today is knowing that if I don't speak up, if I don't say anything, that this could happen to other people. And it happens to men just as much as women, except the documented cases that are reported of men getting raped are less because of the ego, the macho, and we don't talk about that. But just look at the impact of speaking up in Europe. The soccer players that are talking about how when they were in their teens and they were part of these soccer clubs, that their coaches were raping them. Yeah. It's even more difficult for a man to say, this happened to me. And when they try to cover it up or they try to deny it, it just makes it easier to deny it and not make it real when it happens to a woman, because if it's not real to them, how could they accept that it happens to anyone else?
Right. This is I think what people don't understand. I just want to say on the live YouTube stream right now, Jemmy Drake says, so brave of you to talk about this. So this is awesome. We got another question which I'm going to post later coming in from the YouTube stream, but that needs to be really emphasized. The to speak up, there's a lot of things. She's just trying to make, just trying to make money or headlines or whatnot. The likely repercussions against a woman speaking up, the negative, the possible negative repercussions are so huge. That I think that's really not a good argument of she's just doing it for attention or money in the lawsuit. I think that's in most cases a sort of a knee-jerk reaction of a man, which is baloney. That's not to say that 1 out of 100 or whatever the statistics are is possibly a false rape accusation, possibly, but that should not be our first reaction to news like that. I don't know. I mean,
exactly. And the victim becomes ostracized. I mean, that is the reality of things.
That's the norm. The norm is that the victim becomes ostracized, ridiculed. It's very hard to continue the job, and as you pointed out, because I think we really got to keep this in mind, that women's rights or the equality between men and women in terms of legal of the law and such is really not that long ago when that was instituted. And I think you find older people today who very easily would say, because of their own experience probably, like, she should just sort of like calm down about it, and why is she making such a fuss? You hear that with a lot of things, including this, and I've heard it myself. So, yeah.
And you also have to recognize that we are dealing not with money, but with power. These men, they're young guys, they're good looking, they're millionaires. It's not like they can't get a girl or get a date or have a girlfriend. It's to them, they're getting off on the power trip, on being able to do this to other people and say, well, they're going to have to put up with it because I'm the CEO or I'm the president, or hey, we have this company, it's so popular that if she were to speak up, she would never get a job at any other VR company. Nobody's going to take her seriously. But you know the courage that it takes for that woman to say, I'm willing to risk all of that because I value myself enough to say something. She's not just thinking about herself, but she's thinking probably about all the other women that are living that reality. And for the younger generations and the younger women, it's like, ladies, you don't have to put out to be successful. You don't have to have sex and climb the ladder. You have brains. You live in a day and age where technology is now affordable, where content is being crowdsourced, where you could have your own virtual reality studio in your home, and you don't need to put up with this type of behavior. The law will deal with them, but it's also an option and a decision where you choose to respect yourself enough to walk away. And even greater respect to somebody that speaks up and says, this is wrong. Because yes, the law can say you are equal and you're not allowed to do this. And these are the laws against discrimination. But to deal with the retaliation and the community ostracizing you is it takes a lot of courage to do that.
Why can't we just, it's funny that you say, because of course your own resume is, you're now here as a female, but this is a male avatar, and you have explored gender roles. And I've talked to many Second Life business women who said that they would have been much more successful if they had started out as men, and some are men, or their business brand in Second Life are men. So this is just this is just totally interesting. So it's to me it's interesting, and at the same time it's so frustrating that we still live in this such Middle Ages in that regard, that we somehow evaluate also businesses higher, or we value them higher when they're run by men, even in Second Life, which is on paper a free environment where we shed away. These norms fall by the wayside in a good way.
Every time I've done a presentation using Second Life in a professional environment, the first thing people notice is, what is my avatar wearing? Does she have big boobs? Does she look kind of slutty? It's like, okay. And then in world, doing business with other avatars, it's almost like the second they hear that I am a woman, things take a little bit longer. Some people just don't get back to me. So finally, after a couple of years of being in SL, I said, I'm going to try being a guy and using some voice morphing software, so that, I thought about Charlie's Angels. Like, how great would it be if I'm Charlie and I'm kind of controlling everything, but it's really a woman behind the speaker. So I started acting as a male avatar, and it was really amazing to see how fast people got back to me, how quickly business was being done, how seriously I was being taken. And anything I recommended, people are like, oh yeah. And I've done big projects in SL, but as a man, it has been facilitated. And as a man doing a mixed reality presentation to people in the real world that don't have experience with Second Life, the second I put an older gentleman in a suit, as an avatar, it's like, oh, okay. And then the conversation turns serious, and nobody bothers to say, oh, well, you're a hot avatar with big boobs or this and that. Nobody even notices it. So, so there was that gender exploration. And then after that, I just came into this, I would rather just be a ball of light, or I would rather be invisible, or I attended a open simulator community conference as this gigantic androgynous alien. And that's when you start playing, I hear a lot of people go into the furries, you start playing with characters, because at that point you want to break out of the what you experience in your own gender in the real world, and you want to explore how people react socially to you when you are all of these different entities. Yeah. So Second Life has been a great psychological experiment for me. I've been in world since 2006 or 2007. So it has evolved, but I can tell you that it's always been easier as a man, or simply attending, rehearsals or projects, as an androgynous type of character.
You said earlier that some of these founders, it's about power, and I totally don't disagree with you. You said that some of these these people are good looking, young, and they could get normal dates and stuff. I'm not so sure about that. Maybe I'm biased as well, but I do think that there is a connection between this particular industry where a lot of people come out of and again, I mean, I'm a loner myself. I come across as an extrovert, but I was an introvert teenager. It kind of just changed sort of in adult life, and I'm married to an introvert, so I know what that means, and I don't want to judge, but I'm just trying to sort of psychologically, I guess, trying to find a connection between a culture that is so sort of solitary and maybe devoid of human connection. And then when that sort of is then, when people then are able to explore that, it has nothing to do with how good people look. It's more like how well versed are they in connecting with the other sex. And that is a difficult thing when you're in your teens and you're a teenager. I was a musician at the time, and you saw that a lot in my scene. Not nearly as but they're. I'm not going to get into groupie culture, but it's what I'm trying to say is there a connection between the game industry, the virtual reality industry, where a lot of people from the outside would say, hey, why don't you go outside, smell the flowers, why don't you go outside and play with your real friends instead of sitting in front of the computer? Is there a connection between engaging with technology maybe too deeply and then being like all devoid of dealing incapable of dealing with the other sex, I guess, in a normal manner?
Yes, and I see that as a very real factor that also, in regards to Upload, you're talking about CEO and the president, very charismatic people. They're used to talking.
Correct.
Obviously, they're pitching, they're selling. So they don't have, social skill problems like some programmer friends or engineering friends that I know that are mostly, like you said, solitary behind the computer all day. I have friends that, it's almost like I ask them, you don't even speak human. When we're in the same room, they hardly speak. If I get them online, it's like, it's just like nonstop conversation.
Oh my God, Patty, when you're, Patty, now that you're, sorry, I have to interrupt you, but now I feel like a total jerk because you're absolutely right. And now I feel like what I said is really playing into a stereotype of sort of the loner being sort of the sexual creep, because you're making a good point. These two guys at Upload that are accused of doing all this stuff, they are certainly not that stereotype sort of coder in their little basement and then, hello, and start sweating when they see a woman. So
they basically they were throwing parties. Basically, the
Right.
environment was like one giant party in the office. I mean, that's not like your typical loner. Maybe I think that the other men in the office, and this happens a lot too, they might just support that type of environment because they want to avoid conflict, and they kind of want to go along with the cool guys. It's like, oh, haha, yeah, I'll laugh about it. I'm not going to say anything about it. But, it's like you always have to look at the top for where the problem is stemming. And if the CEO and the president are saying, hey, this is who we are, this is what it's like, and they're setting the example, then they're making every other man in that office think that behavior is okay.
You got it, and it's really, and you're right, and you made that point on the get-go. It's really about power. That's really what it is, and in that sense, it's the same as the. It's not the same. There are nuanced differences, but it's very similar to the sex scandal in the Catholic Church, perhaps, or what you mentioned with in sports, where coaches have relationships with younger players and such. It's just absolutely awful. I wonder. So now some people would say, why don't you just go to HR? I mean, that's what they're for. When something happens.
Even HR. I mean, I've talked to HR before, and there's women that work in HR and they're worried about, well, let's not create a big scandal and how do we deal with this? I mean, it is a step in moving forward, and obviously if you're going to file a lawsuit, you have to have documentation that you spoke to HR. So it's important to at least start somewhere. In my experience, when I've approached HR in the past about any type of discrimination, the immediate feedback is, oh, you're over exaggerating, or it's not that big of a deal, or are you sure you want to file a complaint? It's like, I'm not asking you, for a reassurance that I came in here to do this. So, people just have to understand that there are laws and women need to get the courage to speak up and out.
When you had your first job, and you came from like all of us, sort of kind of a sheltered environment that is school, maybe university, and then you go out into the so-called real world, that, because you indicated earlier that happened almost at every position. I mean, what would you recommend? I mean, when you go out there as a young person, as a young woman, what can you do? What should you do?
Look for companies that are led by women. If you're looking for venture capital, look for women, and women in power. The ones that had to go through the school of hard knocks are now in positions to leverage and to help other women. I mean, there are men that are involved, but if you know that a certain company has a certain type of reputation, regardless of, how big they are and what type of connections you can get from it, maybe you will be happier in another type of environment. I think work environment definitely is everything, especially for our culture where we spend most time at work. We spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our own families. So
that's
having that type of work culture is important. Exactly.
That's a topic for another show. I have to cut it short, but you have to come back, if not every week, on this podcast, because it's been overdue. That I wanted to talk with you for a long time. I have to wrap it up because we're filming today, as we tape this, a scene for the upcoming video profile about Arden Schwartzman. My last question would be, and again, all the contextual info about Patty and about this lawsuit here against the two co-founders of Upload VR is on the blog. My last question would be, how is this going to impact the perception of VR in the public's mind? Because there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, this is actually, I think, maybe higher profile and sort of seeping outside of the bubble that we live in than maybe Oculus Rift founder Pamalacky's support for Trump and certain online trolls, which I also found just absolutely abhorrent and shocking. And actually, I wasn't that surprised because I have had interacted with Pamalacky in the past. But how does this thing damage does it damage it at all, the perception of VR and the adoption of VR in the consumer space?
I don't think it will damage the industry and the art form of making virtual reality. If anything, it's going to be more of the company, being put under the glass and having to own up to their actions. And it's also an opportunity for other companies within the VR industry to really step up their game and show that they do support gender equality, that they operate with ethics and honor. And as long as other companies are living that truth, then it's really going to be more an upload problem.
And I want to say that step into the void there, and also I was going to say, I'm going to link on the blog a new startup that I'm involved in. And startup is the wrong term because we don't have any VC money. But VR Creative, vrcreative.com is our new venture. I link to it on the blog.
This is an opportunity, too, for virtual reality companies to make content, to bring awareness to this, exactly what is happening right now. How can you create modules and simulations and content that will build empathy, that will help, train people, that will bring awareness and education, like you said, with media and everything happening around you that's, that's the education that people get. Well, why don't we create the media and the content to build the awareness and to be the change that
it's just that what is frustrating, I'm Facebook friends with a lot of people that are involved in sort of that ecosystem, and I saw incredible fighting, really kind of one-on-one, one person against the other, around this accusations of women against women, where one woman said, "Oh, you're complicit. You were just sort of complicitly defending them, and because you knew about this was going on, you didn't say anything." And then the other woman that was accused of that said, "Oh, no, you just have an axe to grind. I didn't know about this. I'm not affiliated with this company." So there's a lot of infighting going on. Between women who, skimming through this comment thread, seems to me are accusing each other of knowing something and not speaking out. But I guess that's learning from what you said here on the show is also something that happens because everybody is afraid of speaking up, basically.
So all the training that there is for, sexual assault agencies, that could be put into a virtual reality training situation. And if it is, it happens to you, it won't be real, then have somebody not experience the actual rape, but experience the stories of how that affects women and survivors. And then maybe it will become a little more real and people will approach women and victims with a little more compassion.
Patty, it's been an absolute pleasure. We have to wrap up the show. Thanks for the folks who watched this on YouTube. I'm going to link to the YouTube page on the podcast. And this has been the Drax Files Radio with Jo Yardley. Please support the show. Bio and contact info for Patty. So you can actually, Jamie Drake wants to give you a hug. You guys can meet up in the world. And yeah, absolute pleasure. We'll have you back. This is the show. Have a great weekend, everyone, and goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
The Drax Files Radio Hour with Jo Yardley is a weekly production of Basic Drax Entertainment. The show is supported by Time Portal, SL Artist, Warbug, Bay City You Know for Kids, 01 Heavy Industries Corporation, Extraordinary, Ionic, Maven Homes, Giza Creations, Botanical, Strawberry Sing, Abranimations, Eros Avatars, Caravel Design, The Cube Republic, What Next, Landscapes Unlimited, Fallen Gods Incorporated, and Death Row Designs. Thumbnail by Justin Esparza. Contact the show via Skype, Drax Files, Avatar Drax Files, or email radio@draxfiles.com.